morning and welcome. We're glad you could join us today. My name is Chris Williams, and I have the privilege of serving as chair of the Moorman Center for Space Studies, which is the independent think tank within the National Security Space Association. Before getting today's interview underway, I'd like to note that on November 7th, NSSA is hosting an all-day unclassified forum on space domain awareness with key officials from the U.S. Space Force, U.S. Space Command, and industry. We hope you can join us for this exciting and informative event. Registration and other information can be found on the NSSA website, which is www.nssaspace.org. In addition, we will soon publish the second tranche of papers in our Presidential Transition Issue Paper series, so please be on the lookout for those papers. We're excited to devote today's SpaceTime interview to a very important and timely topic, namely how the Department of Defense and the intelligence community can better leverage the vibrant U.S. commercial space sector for innovation in the U.S. national security space enterprise. With us today are three noted experts: General Ellen Pawlikowski, former commander of the Air Force Materiel Command; Ms. Mandy Vaughn, member of the National Space Council's User Advisory Group; and the Honorable Jeffrey Harris, the former Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Space and Director of the National Reconnaissance Office. Thanks to all three of you for your outstanding service to the nation and for joining us today. I note with great pride that all of today's speakers are members of the NSSA Board of Advisors. We at NSSA and the Moorman Center in particular benefit tremendously from the active involvement of our recently expanded Board of Advisors. With regard to today's presentations, please be advised that the views expressed are solely those of the individuals and do not reflect the official policy or position of the Department of Defense, including the Defense Science Board, or the U.S. government more broadly. We at the Moorman Center and NSSA more broadly are firm believers in nurturing the next generation of national security space leaders. In this regard, our plan was to have Ms. Kayla Miller, NSSA's Manager of Association Development, lead this SpaceTime interview. Unfortunately, Kayla is ill today, so I will serve as your moderator. Kayla is an enormously talented and dedicated colleague, truly an essential player in the work of the Moorman Center and NSSA. I know I speak for all my colleagues here when I say it's a true blessing to work with Kayla. Kayla, thank you for all you do and the grace with which you do it. Get better soon. Turning to Ellen, Mandy, and Jeff, we're so glad you could join us today. In terms of our format, we will start with Mandy Vaughn and General Pawlikowski, who will discuss key highlights of the recently published Defense Science Board Task Force Report on Commercial Space System Access and Integrity. Then we will turn to Jeff Harris, who will discuss his insightful paper entitled Technology, System Engineering, and Business Innovation Imperatives, which was just published by NSSA. For our audience, we always welcome your questions, so please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and we will get to as many of your questions as possible. We've allocated a total of about 90 minutes for today's SpaceTime interview, so let's dive right in. So that's the windup. Now here's the pitch. First, Mandy Vaughn, thanks for joining us today and for your work on the NSSA Board of Advisors. I'm sure our audience is eager to learn more about the results of the recent DSB report. So please, Mandy, take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris. Oh, great. Good timing on that horn honking. Sorry about that. I'm outside on a Rome evening. And thank you, Chris, and to the NSSA team for having this discussion. I think this is incredibly timely. And the report that General Pawlikowski and I will summarize here for you was a public version of this, just came out in May earlier this year. But this is actually something we largely did through 23. So this was actually completed and approved by the Defense Science Board in August of 2023. And we spent a lot of the second half of 2023 working with some of the other OSD and Space Force offices on their respective commercial strategies. So this has been very much of an ongoing effort through for a while. So we'll highlight some of the things and we'll send a link out to the report here. But let's dive in. Next chart, please. So I think what we'll go through mostly here is the big rocks that we found on this first half of improving U.S. use of commercial space. One thing that this study was uniquely chartered with addressing is, okay, what are also the risks and vulnerabilities associated with using commercial space if we try to leverage or rely on these sorts of capabilities much more holistically and in an integrated fashion? what's the other side of the coin and how do we deal with that? So we won't go into that part of the study too much on this just because of classification purposes, but wanted to just highlight that that was just as much a part of the study as talking about military utility and classic missions. Next slide. Don't need to belabor this with this audience for sure, but one thing that just to provide context for what we're talking about with commercial space isn't just launch, the classic aware like smoke and fire, and everybody knows about the commercial launch industry and how successful that model has really been. But we were looking at that, sure, but also looking at the global elements of space operations, mission services, data collection, analytics, etc. So basically all of the rest of the ecosystem that supports what are now some of the more classic NRO and Department of Defense missions on behalf of the Defense Science Board. Next chart. This is a quick blurb from the terms of reference. And again, the complete terms of reference are contained in the report. But what I'll highlight here is there's really kind of two halves to the report. One is that what is the military utility from these capabilities? How can the department better leverage this? Where can the department maybe get out of their own way to leverage it? And then what are the risks and vulnerabilities associated with doing such? And then how could we maybe mitigate some of that? But the other thing that was kind of nice is that this is the Defense Science Board, but we were asked to look at models for acquiring these services and the products and the business operations that might need to change associated with that. Because we don't want to go like tilting at the windmill of acquisition reform per se, but at the same time, it's how can we normalize that behavior? And what does the Space Force primarily and the other stakeholders, what could they do to take advantage of it? So it's a little different for the Defense Science Board in that regard, but we were very thankful that Honorable Heidi Shue gave us that latitude to really look at this. Next slide. So this is the team. We had a great team that was we actually, like I said, we did this pretty fast in terms of clock speed for a Defense Science Board study, but we had acquisition experts, space experts, folks from an Intel background, investors, a couple of AI software development gurus. So it was a great group. And we had Lindsay Millard. She was part of the team as well before she moved from R&E over to her current role in OSTP. So I thank everybody for what they were able to do here. This was awesome. Next chart.
Okay, so Mandy kind of laid out what the study was about and the two key questions that we were asked. One of the things that the group spent some time with to make sure we understood is just what exactly is commercial. We hear that term all over the place now. And so we defined it as actually a spectrum of opportunities. On the far left side of the chart you see here, we talk about what we call commercial innovation. This is where it's a commercially inspired idea. It's a concept, a technology, but it's maybe not there yet. And it may be a commercial application of a DoD technology. This area is one that the SpaceWorks, for example, spends a lot of time on. Then the next one is where it's what we call commercial development. Here where we have, this is custom built satellites and systems, ground systems for the Department of Defense, but they're built upon parts and subsystems that are in the commercial world. So there are variations on a commercial system. This example is really what you see today, the Space Development Agency doing. The next one is where you have a tailored purchase. It's a commercial product, but you're ordering from the catalog. And this is kind of a traditional way, for example, that one would buy a wideband global SATCOM satellite that we did with Boeing in the early 2000s. And then finally, you have commercial services where you just buy off the shelf, so to speak, just like everybody else. And of course, the long traditional example of this is SATCOM, commercial SATCOM. And now we're seeing a lot of this in the world of Earth sensing, for example. Our study focused on the right side of this. And the important thing to keep in mind when you look at commercial is that the government has a role, both as a customer, as a regulator, and as an investor. And we'll circle back to that theme at the end here. Next slide.
So a big part of why we really were drilling into this is okay, what is the role of commercial capabilities in overall constellation and mission resiliency? So this chart is really just kind of a summary of some other work that was done to look at different classic mission areas and what can be done in mission areas to make them more resilient. What are tools, tricks of the trade, building on what Doug Lavero built with the resiliency taxonomy in terms of proliferation, disaggregation, etc. But there's other technology elements as well. But what the real aha moment for us with this study is really thinking through of, okay, if we really handle the relationships with these commercial providers at different levels of integration in a very deeply meaningful way, in an integrated way, it can really enable a fundamental change in what is this architectural resiliency. So not only does this help us engage with commercial partners, but everything we're talking about here in this framework to come also can be extended to allies and partners as well. We were focused on commercial, but at the same time, the same thinking can easily apply to that extensive layer. And one thing we really thought through here is when we say resilient architecture and truly hybrid, we mean it in every sense of the word. It's orbital diversity, it's supplier diversity, it's moving missions around into unexpected places, it's different ways of architecting your systems, it's having these enduring contractual relationships with different parts of the ecosystem to enable a lot more creativity in how a lot of these missions can be architected. So some of the classic examples would be surge capacity, whether that be regional or over time, but we see that that's only just a stepping stone, and that's not what we mean by really integrated operations. So we tried to use the study to kind of present a different vision here that we'll unpack as we go. Next slide. So we went through a few use cases, and this is just one slide to summarize things. We like to always start with the commercial SATCOM for UAS because we found in a lot of the more younger areas of the workforce too, it's like, hey, reminding ourselves of the history here, that the Department of Defense and the intelligence community have been using commercial SATCOM for amazing missions forever. So this is not a new concept. So what's working and not working in that regard, and how do we work with new technologies? But then a lot of this detections as a service, a lot of these new emerging concepts, not just the classic EO sorts of missions, are in between the level of buying pixels versus buying analytics. There's a whole world to unpack there. And ever since the Ukraine crisis has started, we've just watched things unfold, both good and bad, in terms of where has commercial helped, where have we had issues, how can we learn from those issues, etc. Ellen, do you want to chime in on that one at all?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, let me go ahead and next slide. So you've seen, Mandy and I have laid out that the world of commercial has grown. It's been part of the Department of Defense for decades, literally. But how do we improve the way we use it? And one of the first steps we did, if we go to the next chart, is to look at what are the challenges and opportunities that we found when we engaged both with the industry and with the government. And there were really three things that we learned from this. One, that the government uses a different business model than the commercial do. And we really need to understand how to bridge this gap. This is a business mechanics, if you will. We talk to each other differently when we're trying to enter into a contract. We have different interpretations of how we spend money, and so that's a key area that we need to bridge. Then there is a concern both on the government side and on the industry side about limiting the use of commercial space. And here's the two spectrums on this. On the government side, there's a concern about being too dependent on it. There's a concern about not being able to rely on it, and needing to be able to control it. This concept of being inherently government jobs to do. On the industry perspective, it's like, well, you're not letting us know what it is you really want. You're not giving us the opportunity to provide our services and to be fully integrated into what you do. And then, and part of what we saw was that there's a policy interpretation that then limits the use of commercial space based on like what's inherently government or what can a contract do and not do. So these were the three key areas that we identified as things that we needed to address if we were really going to fully embrace commercial and make the most of it for our warfighters. Next chart. I'm not going to go into detail on each of these, but because I really summarized a lot of this before, but what we found is that when you're on the government side, whether you're looking about how we buy it or how we use it, there's just many barriers to doing it. I talked about the models, everything from how we estimate the life cycle cost of it, how we grant security clearances so we can communicate with the industry. And then in operations, we don't practice with it. We don't use it. Very limited incorporation of space commercial systems until we kind of scab it on at the end, is really the way I would put it. So, and so these are the two. It's not just an acquisition problem. People tend to want to blame the acquisition guys. You're not buying commercial. It's both a challenge for the acquisition folks and for the operation folks. And so it really drives the need for a full integration of commercial capabilities across the spectrum of how the DoD operates. And if we go to the next chart, this gets us to our first finding and recommendation. Our finding really is that we just have both cultural and bureaucratic barriers that slow down this commercial adoption. And so if we're going to really adopt it, our first recommendation is that we have to implement an end-to-end framework for integrating existing and planned commercial capabilities. This is everything from when we do architectures for new systems to how we are going to integrate them into acquisition strategies. And then our second recommendation is really a message to the world outside the space community within the DoD that if the space community is going to truly integrate, then all of the processes, the institutional processes that the Department of Defense uses, that's from how we plan, how we program, how we budget, how we acquire, has to also embrace the incorporation of the way commercial operates and the way it could be integrated. Now, if we go to the next chart, we actually provided specific individual recommendations for that end-to-end framework. And all of these are in detail in the report. I'll just pick out these. Some of these are things that we are recommending that will allow us to, if you will, seed the pot a little bit to get people thinking about it. Like, for example, in the requirement side, start with the question of, how can I use what's available? Explore commercial capabilities right up front, as opposed to, here's what I need, now let's see what I can fill in the blanks. So this is a key to, in the requirement side, by the way, to implementing the SSC strategy and approach of use what's there, only buy what I need. If you don't look at it up front, then you're just not really leveraging it. Then on the next chart is our further recommendations, and I'll highlight just one here, which is to create a fund and an approach for the operational community to learn how to exploit commercial capability, much like those of you who may be familiar with the 10-CAP program that does this for our national security space capability. So there's far more specific recommendations on how to do this in the report. If we go to the next chart, this one deals with how that planning and programming, which basically just says you got to change everything from how you do cost estimating to incorporate the commercial way of doing cost estimating. We need to put more flexibility in our budgeting that allows us to not be married to individual budgeting program elements, and much more detail in the report. Next chart. And then finally, in the acquisition side, same thing here, more embracing of the commercial practices right from the beginning, not when you hand it to the contracting officer and say, okay, make this happen, but look at it from the beginning. And then finally, for me, and over to you, Mandy, to talk about the commercial use of how we deal with securing and making sure we're secure and viable when we use commercial in our operations.
Right. So the only things that we'll hit on for right now in terms of the vulnerabilities and risks, the first is really trying to codify the realization that the commercial participants in all of these missions, they're dealing with the same threats that the DoD and the IC systems are too. We're all in the same environment together. So all of the talk of reversible, non-reversible, kinetic, all the different flavors of ASAT attacks, the commercial guys are in there with us, right? The only other element that exists that's unique to the commercial is just the economic vulnerability and market forces. And what does that mean for the commercial business case? That is also part of what they're concerned about. But one thing that was really interesting that we saw is in terms of some of the more low-hanging fruit, how do you shore up some vulnerabilities? There is a real lack of information flow. Even early when things were very dynamic and happening in the Ukraine conflict, just the lack of threat sharing and threat data, it took a while for some of the participants to engage in a conversation. This is the kind of thing that we need to practice, right? And there were also a lot of things where in some of our use cases where the government is always saying they're concerned because we can't necessarily trust the commercial partners from a cyber perspective. A lot of the commercial participants, they said, we'd gladly shore up cyber things if you told us what to do, because it makes good business case for us to do that. So one thing that we do have in the recommendations as well is like, let's start talking about cyber red teaming. In the craft world, the aircraft craft world, they have a safety review board that kind of has to go through the baseline operations and safety of all of the participants. An extension to the space community could be a healthy cyber baseline of different levels of cybersecurity based on the level of integration that a potential partner may have. So those are just some of the big highlights, but the bottom line is there are technical things that can apply to the commercial sector in the right ways. Not all of them, certainly. There's things that are just kind of stay on the government side. But then the other element too is the role of the government in terms of how do you protect from adversary use of commercial has to not just be regulatory, right? It needs to be a broader all of government think. Back to what General Pawlikowski said of the government's role as an investor, regulator, and customer. We need to think through those roles and all of these portions and how do we deal with adversary use of these same systems. Next slide, please. So the findings that kind of came out of this part, the first is how do we incentivize and build trust and resilience in this industrial base? So next slide. You'll see in here, again, this is a little bit, we have a little less specificity in some of the areas, but on the classified side, we have some more specifics we could go into in another environment. But one thing on the information sharing, this is the low-hanging fruit, right? So between how do we get more companies through the clearance process earlier so we can have critical information sharing at the right time. Just because a company is clear doesn't mean you have to give them data, but you have the ability to. And then how do we deal with that cyber baseline? Next chart. And here's the vulnerability assessments. Same as that kind of safety review. Let's do a vulnerability, a cyber review. Next chart. and the surge capability. So again, with the incentivizing trust, this is again kind of one of those low-hanging fruit ways where you can leverage commercial without feeling like it's more of a risk to your baseline mission. And we've seen some pockets of this starting to happen on the DoD side, so that's good. But again, that's only one step of what we talk about with real integration. Next chart. And next chart. I kind of talked about all that together. So one thing in terms of the foreign use of these same systems, so we need to talk about this in terms of how do we monitor and assess the extent of adversary use of a lot of the same systems. And again, that can come through with an open information exchange with the industrial partners that we're concerned about and would like to use. Next chart. And next chart. So this is really kind of our summary chart, kind of going back into that government role. And it's not a, and one thing that was really evident through a lot of this is between the craft model, working capital funds, long-term managed service contracts, buying things more creatively as a service. When you couple all of those different business models with where the different commercial capabilities are in their level of maturation, it really is, you need the right tool for the right job. So we know we need to work with the acquisition community to think through this at the architectural level when they even start that acquisition process. But one thing we thought was really interesting with the thought piece, and this is our get off the stage chart, is there's all this talk of, okay, if the government's going to get involved in something, they're going to tip the scale, they're going to pick a winner, or they're going to not support a market, what have you. But one thing is really evident is if the government doesn't get involved, then what are the risks associated with that? And we're watching this kind of play out in a couple of ways, to where the risk of the government not thinking through and participating in some of these emerging markets could really put what the DoD and the IC need to gain from these capabilities. And when you look at the whole integrated deterrence in terms of economic stability and techno-economic competition, that should matter. So this was kind of an eye-opening thought piece for us to really tackle and think through this in a bigger way. And I'll turn, and Ellen, please chime in.
Yeah, I think this chart is really our get off the stage and where we really focus. And it really points out the fact that the government does have these three roles, and we need to think about how we use all three of those roles. As a regulator, if we constrict the commercial industry, as we did with radar, for example, in the last decade, then we may not allow our industry to compete in worldwide. If we invest, we need to make sure that we are not creating a monopoly by and how we invest, and that we are not driving toward a non-viable commercial product if we are too heavy-handed in our investment. And then finally, we have to be a customer. We have to be a demanding customer, but we have to be a customer that's flexible enough to understand, to use the off-the-shelf product, not always be demanding that we get a unique product. So, and that's really what this chart summarizes, particularly when you look at different markets, from a very mature market to a market that's not even there yet. And we give some examples in the report. But I think this is the bottom. This chart basically describes how it's a framework that the government, that the DoD needs, and that framework is how we make the decisions on which of those three things we're going to use, roles we're going to use throughout the process. And that probably takes up more time than you wanted us to have, Chris. So I think we can, this chart kind of summarizes what we just said. So I think we can turn it over to you, Chris, and perhaps Jeff at this point.
That's fantastic. Really appreciate that overview. Very meaty report. Well done to you and your colleagues. Obviously, you spent a lot of time on it and hit a lot of key points there. A lot of challenges for the department in proceeding on this, and we'll come back to that. So thank you for your presentation. Let me turn now to Jeff Harris. Jeff, thank you for the paper you just presented, just published through NSSA, and floor is yours. Over to you.
Great. Ellen, Mandy, thank you for setting the stage to what I hope will be a good conversation with the people on this webinar this morning. This is not a new problem. This is not a new set of concerns. This is something that we oft talk about. And today we want to sort of poke the bear a little bit in order to say, in the absence of poking the bear, we are now in a great power competition, and the innovation of America and the innovation that's fueled by venture and PE capital, whether that money is putting into startups or longer term companies, are things that we want to appreciate. Recognize, as Dorothy said in Wizard of Oz, we are no longer in Kansas, and it's our opportunity to figure the best way through the process. Next slide. So what I love about the FAR is I grew up in a world that treats the FAR as a set of regulations, and I would contend as a thought experience, you can do most anything that's right, legal, and ethical. And the FAR, there is a path through the FAR, maybe not the well-worn path through the FAR, but I had an experience where, well, the FAR clearly says, hey, if you can get commercial products, commercial services, as Mandy pointed out, typically non-developmental items that come out of a catalog, to the maximum extent practicable, commercial products and commercial services should fit the needs of the Department of Defense. In the last week, we talked a lot about space, but the core technology are really being born of this innovation and systems thinking that gets us off. Now, within the Department of Defense, I have witnessed fights between FAR Part 12 and FAR Part 15. And one of my favorite was the success in FAR Part 12 could not be rewarded because the accounting principles that are required in FAR Part 15, aren't required in 12. So the people doing the auditing felt left out. And so we were moving contracts from Part 12 to Part 15 in order to do the auditing. And under a Freedom of Information Act, in the 1,000 or so pages that I was reviewing, I loved the fact that we moved away from sort of the goodness in order to sort of feed the beast of the bureaucracy. Next slide. So when in doubt, go to Webster's. And Webster has two simple definitions. And when you look at it, commercial really is an advertisement that comes between two segments of a show on TV. And I said, well, that's not exactly what I was looking for. And they said, well, what is commercial as an adjective? Well, it's suitable, adequate, or prepared for commerce, which actually gets us closer back to what FAR Part 12 was saying. But what I find in our defense and intelligence circles is we use commercial in sort of bizarre ways. And so the technology itself is some intellectual property, some invention, some enabler of mission that allows something to happen or potentially to happen. And how we get to be able to tap that technology is really what we're talking around. So I have said for the last couple of years, let's be careful how we use commercial because it mutates. And so I'll contend that any company could be considered commercial. And maybe, I don't believe it, but maybe companies that are in the stock market are even more commercial because they have shareholders. And I find it sort of an interesting way to sort the world when we're thinking about the uniqueness of national security and national security space in this conversation. And I think Ellen and Mandy did a nice way of breaking that out. But I think we might actually get to even a better conversation if we use the word commercial less and talk more about the enablers. So that's sort of rant number one. All right, next slide. When in doubt in 2024, you go to ChatGPT. And with the simplest of questions, yesterday I asked ChatGPT what she thought of us. And we admired cultural organizational resistance. We admired acquisition procurement complexity. We say we're different because we have a compliance model formed around security. And if I would throw our security professionals under the bus, I would say security really is a compliance model, and the compliance model was invented in the industrial age. And now that we move to the information age, we really do have to flog that. So I can write and deliver under contract new software into mission that we see from SEO and DUI, but getting it accredited on the system to move into operations is a 9-month, year-long process. So 9 weeks to write it, 9 months to accredit it, and we want to go to war in a peer-to-peer kind of operation. And so I don't underrate the importance of the security and compliance, but the old paved road to get to accredited software certainly would have to be something that we want to look at, and ChatGPT tells us to be mindful of that. When the founding fathers set up the democracy, they realized it would be really hard. And we gave the power of the purse to the Congress, and the Congress is responsible on all of us citizens to exercise that. But in the speed of technology, it's hard to imagine what we learned from the Soviets with their 5-year plan would be the way to implement speed and agility in things of importance or complexity. So we know how to work within and around the budget. And the DIU is running a very interesting model with the Congress right now, where they've received, I think now 2 years in a row, or soon to be 2 years in a row, about $1 billion appropriation that DIU has to spend that following the laws of the land, but they can sort of report back to Congress on the initiatives that they're undertaking, so we don't build in sort of the delay of the building and the delay of the Congress into the delay of implementing the technologies. As the technologies are invented, there is the monetization of intellectual property. And it turns out universities, setting aside Gatorade and the University of Florida, are relatively poor monetizers of intellectual property, but they're great inventors of the intellectual property. The Defense Department, maybe even worse, where they're trying to say, I want to win the war and enrich the American taxpayers by managing IP. I think, generally speaking, in my experience, has been more of a fool's errand. And we chase a lot of the smart IP away from defense and intelligence community contracting because it involves more process and more lawyer than I think the pot at the end of the rainbow suggests is necessary. And then, as Mandy, I think, really spoke to with Ellen's color commentary, I can have a technology that is built for purpose, that has a utility in the defense and intelligence environment, but without being able to speak the language and impedance match. Sometimes it's not the technology's thought, it's the ability to imagine. So the 9/11 report sort of opens up with what the U.S. had was a failure to imagine of the weaponization that took place on 9/11. And what I've enjoyed, probably one of the most over my career arc, is it used to be difficult to admit to the fact of pictures from space. And the images we get from space are now in all of our grandmothers' repertoire as they use Google Earth to plan vacations and to understand the globe in which we live. So the ability to communicate and understand not only how do we solve the problem the old way, but how we might be open to solving the problem the new way. The lack of flexible contracting mechanisms is really just a muscle movement. We had a Secretary of Defense who tried to bring a lot of the contracting into the government professionals. which was well intended, but the retirement rate of the government professionals exceeds. And so I was at a conference a couple of years ago where the contracting executive for the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency described how effective their contracting was using the General Services Administration. And in the Q&A, I think we sort of questioned, well, why would we go to GSA when you have the ability, within the FAR to do about whatever you want? Oh, no, GSA has the ability to do contracting that we NGA don't have the authorities for. So we use the authorities that GA has to get the outcomes that we want. And I went back to a different time and different place to where, in particular, the authorizing committees that I had the opportunity to work with would be very anxious to understand what contracting approvals do you need in order to take national security and move it higher in the government food chain than GSA's more typical responsibility of managing the real estate holdings of the federal government. Just saying there is a difference, and I think we can slay that dragon. And then vendor lock-in and legacy is all about competition and how you let people onto the playing field. And I think the capitalist underpinnings of the United States of America allow us to deal with how to handle that. And the legacy system is really an artifact of not achieving speed. So I didn't have to do any work in order to hit a button after 10 seconds and get this list. Next chart. So, it's easy to highlight the flaws of DoD and the intelligence community and set aside the huge success stories and the huge success stories of the DoD and the IC operating in a hybrid world. And so the early part of my career, I was all about high-end image processing in order to allow the pixels to interface with the brain to get insightful results. And I grew up in college in a world of film return systems. And as I moved into the National Reconnaissance Office, my job for maybe a year was making sure the film camera was focused and exposed properly. And after that year, I've been digital 100% of my time. And we were spending U.S. government resources to understand state of practice in image processing. And one of the early highlights of my career back into the 80s was visiting with the emerging Pixar coming out of the brainchild of Steve Jobs and sitting with uncleared Pixar. They were using acronyms that we had invented in the SCI secret world for the digital processing. It wasn't classified. It was just the acronym that we used in order to describe the mathematical function that we were doing when we multiplied to change a gain curve on getting contrast to be more human friendly. When I saw that Pixar was using those same terms, I realized that we were beginning to shift the world. And as General Pawlikowski pointed out, we have to fix both system acquisition and operations. And what we're doing right now in the Department of Defense is showing the realm of the possible with RCO, SCO, DIU, and not fully appreciating the heavy lift that it is to get it to operations. And every time that I fly to a war zone and you see the systems on the war zone, you notice that not many of them are programs of records, but they become the programs of operation because the enlisted folks with their MacGyver capabilities allow them to get what they need to serve the need. But we fall short, as ChatGPT pointed out, for the adoption in a timely manner of best in breed with emerging technologies and operations. I'm reminded of when I was director of the NRO, I saw a fast fact that I will repeat, but I have no way to validate if it was true several decades ago. The NRO at the time was the 5th larger user of global bandwidth as compared to telecommunication companies, anybody else that was buying and moving ones and zeros around the globe. You know, the NRO as an entity, if it summed up its bandwidth, was number 5. And what the organization really need was modems in order to modulate and demodulate those signals. And I recall doing R&D with a small company in the Beltsville area of Maryland, where the 4 owners of the company were roommates because they had graduated, I'll make it up, from the University of Maryland, had gotten an apartment together and were inventing high-speed modems. And you know, the big part of that success story was, as I recall, we were buying modems which were allowing us to move the data around the globe more efficiently to the analysts. But the second the modem went from custom build to I could buy it as a catalog item was huge. And the fact that the modem company was bought by AT&T for $1 billion was a measure of the success of the government investment to invent something that needed to be invented, to allow the company to buy a commercialized product that was no longer custom, and allow for industry to be rewarded. I had an experience with Cray supercomputer the same way. We needed unique I/O for handling the memory to the compute side of Cray, and the only way we would award the contract to Cray was Cray saying it would move as quickly as possible into the catalog so it was available to other operators. What the government really wanted in that example is they wanted to move the maintenance of that capability off the government-funded maintenance schedule onto the commercial schedule. Next slide. The paper that the Moorman Center published this time yesterday really speaks to the speedier adoption of innovative new functionalities and figure out how we change behaviors. Remember, you get the behaviors that you incentivize, and the behaviors of all bureaucracies are to add nails to the door, barn door, even after all the horses have escaped, to make sure no problem can ever repeat itself. So the operators in the bureaucracy are good technologists and really well intended, but they have a programmatic skepticism towards invention that's principally organized around risk. And I think Mandy and Ellen's chart that showed how you march across, you know, sort of the degree of integration to the degree of adoption by the Department of Defense. We can think about, you know, Olympic diving, where we can agree on the risk versus the degree of dive complexity. But the speed of technology and the operational mission disruption that it empowers really challenges risk-averse bureaucracies. So, you know, we as a country watched the IRS fail at several multi-billion-dollar computer enhancements in a row because they kept trying to take the computers, in my opinion, and that's just not my expertise, and make the old way of doing analysis work for newfangled computer methods, and was not a cutting-edge acquisition organization. The Defense Department doesn't have that luxury. And we have to embrace the speed of technology, and we have to really empower the institutional flexibility. Now, I know that you have the institutional flexibility in the IC and the DoD because we demonstrate it every time, but typically we do it by creating a new organization versus streamlining the old organization. And I know exactly why that happens, and it is really well intended, but the speed at which we must operate in great power competition, and we look at how China operates through failures, is a good reminder of what we used to do when Discoverer, aka Corona, was on Flight 13 when it was first successful, where 2 weeks after failure, they were launching again. And the program manager back in 1959 says, as long as we don't get the same failure twice in a row, we're making progress. So the better, faster, stronger, more cost-effective mission accomplishment is the measure that the bureaucracy has to do. One of my reports when we were getting small drones operational in the battlefield was out talking to a Marine unit. And I tell this in the context of what we now know about small, I'll say, commercial scale drones, ones that are put together with primarily commercial parts. This Marine unit had 2 drones that they were flying in operations. And my observer went back into the conference room sort of 6 weeks later, and one of the 2 operational drones was hanging above the conference room table and said, how'd the drone get here? And they said, well, since you were gone, we crashed the drone and we got yelled at. And so we've now put the drone where we won't get yelled at again. So we stopped using this new technology because the incentive system was not to get yelled at for crashing, a prototype piece of equipment. So in that is the context of testing these technologies to get a more efficient mission accomplishment, and really understanding the necessary system engineering in order to drive the mission solution. And I look at the way we buy stuff and the well-intended requirements process coming through the JROC tends to build the platforms into things, and the things don't talk to other things as well as they should to give a fully integrated operation, which is some of the Band-Aid operations that we've now done in order to allow the operators to gain. So the PMOs and the program managers are rewarded for cost, schedule, and performance, not for interoperability. And the plug-and-play world that we enjoy outside of the Defense Department really needs to move inside the Defense Department in order to take advantage. So I think a long-range kill chain right now is probably the best example of how we have exactly the systems we probably need, but we don't have the systems yet trained to what we must do because we bought them purposefully sort of under a different construct, a lot of which was managing the handling of risk through the lens of budget and not overstaying our welcome with our elected representatives in Congress. Next slide. So the challenge is to bridge the chasm, to leverage the innovations, and again, the innovations that are now being principally fueled by capital that's outside of the Department of Defense and the U.S. government research and development capital. I am perfectly comfortable that we can reimagine the incentive structures, have Congress as a partner, get to a cultural rebirth to move rapidly from lab bench to the field, and take better advantage of the promise of lucrative private capital rewards, and work for innovation and risk to be appropriately rewarded. I sat on the NSA advisory board for years, looking at their acquisition programs, and pushing risk from the government to industry was a goal of the NSA acquisition executive, particularly if they would take the contract as fixed price. So if there's an agreed to understanding of risk, and when the person taking the risk might benefit from a slightly outsized reward, that can be a really good trade. And the last bullet came from the vice chair of the JCS, who was the chair of the JROC, and he turned to me at dinner And he said, have you ever noticed that every important program that the DoD develops, and he was using the F-117 as an example, he said, there were 6 of us in the program office. There was no limit on how often we could go visit the contractor, but all of the acquisition rules were suspended because it was so important to the DoD. And he said, as a 4-star, I've been on programs time and time again where I've seen these successful programs over short periods of time, but the mattress mice are the well-intended mattress mice are held at bay. Next slide. So when I started with commercial, I said, let's stop using the word commercial as we go through this conversation today. What I hear most in government is 2 things. I'm concerned that the company that I'm about to buy this from may not have a viable business to survive, and that is a good thing to have happen. Early in my career, I was buying huge disk packs because we were trying to move to real-time processing of satellite imagery coming from space at a rate that we didn't have the ground processing to keep up with it, and we had to buffer the data. And I wanted to get from the step of putting it on tape, which brought some inherent risk to it, to we could put it on tape in parallel process it, and we had to do speed buffering. And the disk company went out of business while we're procuring the disks, and we had to cause the company to get bought. So we had to be innovative on how we figured out how to fix the business model of a company we had already bet in, and that was cheaper than all the other alternatives I recall doing, and on the scale of things was a relatively small hill to climb. The other thing is I hear over and over again that the government doesn't like to pick winners. And my experience in the government was we pick winners all the time. And one of the things I noticed in the commercial remote sensing marketplace was the government was pushing it to be a commodity long before it became a commodity, and was not differentiating the products of the better vendor against meeting the government's needs. So I've watched the well-intended trade-offs sort of continue, sort of belaying the rewards to the marketplace. And I don't mind that it takes enough time to make sure the winner can be the winner, but we really do need to pick winners and move on. And my particular bugaboo right now is what I appear to be giving lip service to companies trying to do business of the government. And I was in a meeting 3 weeks ago with a former senior from the Office of Management and Budget, who says, look, we're budgeting money to sort of entertain commercial with here's the money, even though we're not fully integrating their services or their product in, but it's just easier to sort of do this. And I don't think that's everybody's intent, but when I was in the Pentagon, there was a company whose business model was to live on earmarks by complaining to get just enough earmarks to survive. And I talked to my successor in the Air Force and said, I bet you have a memo right now on your desk from this company, because their business model is less about innovation and more about working the system. And he said, how do you know? When he pulled the memo out of the stack. So we don't live in a perfect world, but when we have honest people trying to make an honest living, working the Department of Defense or the IC's mission, let's bring them in to be integral to the success, just like we have hundreds of companies we can show where that works. And where it feels like lip service in 2024, we are today, last night, tasking commercial ISR assets by an emailed spreadsheet, and how that could exist and why we allow that to exist. Because in the Microsoft Excel business model, I don't think they ever thought that their capability would really be used for satisfying analysts' need while you have a war going on in the Mideast and Ukraine. Really, we can do better than that. So hold industry responsible. Don't give them a giveaway, but bring them into the fold and take advantage of them, as the Defense Science Board study clearly pointed out. Next slide. And, given the investment in R&D and the invention and the speed of invention, we cannot succeed as the bright light, as a democracy without fully understanding how to do it. When I went to the breakfast meeting with the Secretary of Defense and the Director of Central Intelligence and talked about the importance of the commercial remote sensing policy, I said there's two factors. One is the US factories need to be filled with modern technologies getting built, solving tough problems. And the satellites are lasting, NRO procured satellites are lasting so long, I can't keep the factories full. So let's burden share between these two missions. And if there was some hierarchy of missions, I would say in the end of the century conversation would say, these will enable the NRO to climb higher in the tree, and all of these systems working in an integrated fashion. We started down that road, and now it's been too long and not a fulsome enough conversation. And if I look at airplane coming off the assembly line at one a day, Rosie the Riveter was really leveraging the power of the U.S. industrial base, and it's just much more than a poster. So with that, I hope we can take the conversation for the next 30 minutes where you can challenge our assumptions and challenge our interpretation of where we are at this point in the movie.
Well, thank you very much. Tremendous presentations, and obviously an enormous amount of work went into the report, the DSB report that Ellen, you and Mandy co-chaired. Congrats on that. And Jeff, your presentation is very thought-provoking, and the paper you produced is very timely and very interesting. I'll start the questions, but again, I would remind our audience that we welcome your questions, so please submit them using the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. For all three of you, one of the key issues that I know government folks worry about is the staying power of companies, of commercial companies, and each of you talked about that to different degrees. Let's talk a little bit more about the ability of those companies to scale up from modest production to larger quantities, which, demonstrating that ability or showing a clear path for how you can grow to that more higher, away from onesies and twosies to multiple tens, hundreds, whatever, thousands even of satellites or other equipment, is extraordinarily important, both for the survival of the company and to provide reassurance to otherwise skeptical government purchasers. So what do you all see as the key to success in being able to scale up to large scale production and overall staying power? Ellen, why don't we start with you, and then we'll turn to Mandy and wrap it up with Jeff.
Well, Chris, I think when we talk about commercial, one of the things to understand, if you look at the commercial industry, it's typically those that are looking to provide a service as opposed to trying to sell a one each. And so I think a perfect example of a success story, of course, is SpaceX. And in that case, when SpaceX recognized that they needed to increase the volume of launches they were having in order to drive down the cost, because it becomes which comes first, the chicken or the egg? The smaller the quantity you have, the more costly it is for you to build each individual one. And in this case, creating the concept of more customers, and their customer was satellite communication users. and created a huge volume for SpaceX launch vehicles with Starlink. So the key is to find a product that you can sell and have a large volume of that product, interest in that product. And the success that SpaceX had with that is truly amazing when you look at how they have been so successful in driving down the cost of launch by the being able to reuse the rocket. So when I have companies approach me about, hey, we want to get into the space business, so how about the government? The key is you've got to have a business model that has something besides the government in it. If you're going to rely on the government, it's going to take you longer. You've got to have a commercial product that is going to be viable early in order to create that volume that you're going to need.
Thank you, Mandy.
No, I agree with everything Ellen said, but want to add another layer in terms of, again, the role of the government kind of generally speaking here, because again, launch is a good example of we have a policy that says assured access to space, which means we want to have we want to have 2 providers or more. And one thing that you need to then think about is okay, well, in one example that's playing out right now, SDA, if I was in Derek's shoes, I would do exactly the same thing he's doing. He's incentivized to try to get his assets on orbit for as low a price point as possible. So bundling things on SpaceX is great. But if you take a step back and say, okay, but if I want to curate a market, is that the right answer versus saying, okay, let's give some of the new entrants some of the architecture to fly. If we have they need to get the reps and sets too, right? So it's to me, I really look at this. And launch is just an easy example because it's out there, but it's a question of curation. And to Ellen's point, you're exactly right that they need to have a commercial business case, sure, but at the same time, the role of the government in being able to support or warp that commercial case just can't be understated. So I think one of the best things that SDA is on the precipice of having created is an industrial base a supply chain of bus providers, of people that are kind of these buses. And so at this point, then it's okay, what is the next step to what's the value? How can that ecosystem be leveraged to different mission areas? How do we use that investment that's happened on the part of SDA and from those companies themselves? And how do we make that stick? So I'll pause there and love to hear what Jeff has to say. And Jeff, I love your FAR 12 versus 15 comments. And you are so right. People that think OTAs are a panacea, they are not. You can do what you need in the FAR. You just got to know your way through.
So I like the two answers. Chris, if I hijack your question where you put it for startup, I'd say several times in my career, we're building $1 billion, really, really complicated program. And one of the suppliers, vendors, partners, subcontractors, primes are digging a hole with no end in sight. And I've gone to the leadership of a company that knows how to do it and asked them to go teach the company that doesn't know how to do it, typically a competitor. And you could say mentor protege, but if you ask two companies on the stock market that are competitors, you say, look, I really need to get this capability on orbit at this time. These people are a year into admiring the problem. We can't replace, fire, hire, send a team in there as a Tiger team and go fix this problem. So sample one. Sample 1B is the deputy director of the NRO called me when I was at Lockheed and says, one of your principal competitors just can't get this right. I'm losing 2 days for every day on this program. It's basic engineering that they grew so fast, they never quite figured out how to do this basic engineering. Can you put a team in there and teach them? And we did. An important customer asked. It was table stakes to play in national security. And I want to say, in the greater good, the right thing would happen for the right reasons to the companies that play in order to help things turn out to be a good way. Now I'll go back to sort of Ellen and SpaceX. I'm at a meeting at SpaceX. There are 5 customers looking to buy SpaceX launches. Principally at the time was Iridium, who had bought $500 million worth of SpaceX launches before the Falcon really had a good launch record. And the head of the Iridium space program, Scott Smith, had taken a tour of the SpaceX factory and called me, and he said, "Hey, am I making a mistake shoving my chips across the table on SpaceX?" And I go, "No, here's why." And we talked through it, and he had actually procured some backup launches. Fast forward, I'm in a meeting in Hawthorne, and the 5 customers, government and private, are in the room, and we're discussing the pedigree of the design. Now, Falcon 9 is flying. It's not flying at the rate that we have today, and had not yet landed, but NASA was using it, the DoD was using it, DoD had ordered. And the people that are all in, the commercial companies, are having a different conversation than the government people. And it got to be right after lunch, and I couldn't stand it anymore. And I spoke up for the first time in the meeting, and I'm standing in the back, and I said, "Oh, whoa, 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 whoa. Imagine that we're buying an iPad, and we're buying it from the late, great Steve Jobs. And the government people here in the room says, we really like this iPad, but that big button on the bottom, we'd like you to move it 3/4 of an inch to the left." What would be the answer? And I don't know whether this is cable TV or not, but it would be an answer that was only appropriate for cable TV, blank you. And I said, so here's a rocket that is flying, and we're having a meeting about taking the design back through CDR to make our Air Force customer happy with it. And I said, I think we're having the wrong conversation. I understand why the Air Force wants to do it. But I said, here's a chart that I've put together that says in 4 more launches, we will have launched more Falcon 9 engines than ULA has launched because of the volume. So I said, we're going to spend $100 million with FFRDC and CETA validating the design, and about simultaneously with the design being validated, we will have launched more rockets than ULA. So that's not an anti-ULA. It's a shift in the business model that you had to prove yourself to somebody. And I sort of said, yeah, I think after 100 engines have flown without a problem, in this case, 1, we can work through it. So Chris, back to your question, I think startup brings an interesting part that says, do you have to make your business model close only on my money? And if I'm catering only to the defense marketplace, that's a different question. If it's built on a commercial product that is, I'll say, dual use for the purpose of this conversation, a slightly different company. So again, I take it back to the rant that I had in my charts. Go understand the risk and figure out how you mitigate that, recognizing, like in a pottery store, if you break it, you own it. So if I'm buying some of these technologies, until I get it to a sustainable part, I may own more of it than I want. But a company I'm very familiar with that has a game-changing technology that is over the moon what the government needs. 2 different agencies have evaluated it at the technology level and said, this is exactly what we're looking for. Give us a couple of years until we can build it into the program of record. And that system just doesn't work.
And I think another element too is the lack of clarity in the government's demand signal, and the private investment that's going on out there. It's kind of getting dispersed. It's going all over the map, rather into some focused areas where if we knew, like on-orbit servicing, for example, if we really knew that the government customer wanted to go all in and help seed a commercial marketplace there, that would help focus, and some companies would be ready to scale now, right? So I think we're by the government not leaning in on where they could really leverage this stuff, we're creating more companies. We're just kind of accelerating companies to get to the precipice of the valley, and not kind of getting enough mass for them to be able to scale.
And the lean, it might be 25 cents on the dollar.
Chris, you're on mute.
Thank you. For Ellen and Mandy, your report says the requests recommends that we integrate existing and planned commercial capabilities into national security space architectures. To what extent have the SWAC analyses that have been done to date given a fair shake, if you will, to commercial, and how commercial capabilities can play in their force design analyses? What grade would you give them at this point? Are they on the learning curve and making good progress in that regard? Is it still an outlier, or how would you characterize that?
Mandy, I think you're more familiar with that than I am.
Oh, fine, I'll start. You know, it's improving. I think it definitely is improving. I had with one hat that I wear, where I support Embedded Ventures, a VC firm. We have a CRADA with SpaceWorks, and we had the initial discussion between SpaceWorks and the SWAC. Oh gosh, this 3 years ago-ish now, I guess. And part of that discussion was to say, how can we help SWAC understand what the capabilities are in this ecosystem? So I think the SWAC team does an outstanding job with what they have to do, because every one of these architectures is an indeterminate problem. But the feedback mechanism of what's happening in the state of the art, I think they're just getting their head around how to do that. And the other thing too is for them to be looking at force designs kind of mission area by mission area. You're already kind of buying into this. Does the government have to own it all from end to end to control it? They're not necessarily looking at the entire state of play of what is the existing state, and how could we leverage all of this stuff that's already happening, versus saying, okay, I have a missile warning missile track force design I need to have come out that closes unto itself. So I think they're definitely on the learning curve and going in the right way and starting to have different discussions about this. But I think not just the SWAC, but just the requirements definition, the AOA process in general doesn't take into account, no kidding, what is commercial doing, and in the time frame of the system we're talking about, what could commercial capabilities really provide? And never mind kind of the allocation of kind of what happens now. We will allocate this chunk for commercial, but flip that on its head and say, let's push commercial to get there. And how much of how much can we just buy as a service from them? So the actual acquisition and the force design has to be a lot smaller. So I could see SWAC's position being much more turning into a network engineering problem than a force design problem. And I think the conversation is starting to change a little bit in that regard, but it's still formative.
Thank you.
Yeah, if I could just add a little bit to that, Chris,
Sure.
if I could just add, I think the key for the future for SWAC has got to be more seamless integration with the non-space warfighter, because the SWAC starts with, okay, what is it that we think is needed from the space community? And that demand signal to them comes from those non-space folks. I have one example of something that's happening that I'm really excited about as I watch it evolve. And that's this program called Global Lightning, because it is a perfect example of an application. And we weren't involved. I was actually involved a little bit in the beginning, but it was done prior to ours, which is where the Air Force, under the auspices of what is now part of the Air Force Research Lab, but one of these activities like Jeff referred to, like the SCO and RCO, made some early investment in Starlink as an idea, as a communication, very small. And they also, at the same time, started to look at what they call this hybrid terminal that could handle either of them. And I'm so excited now because now that the Starlink is a reality, has a capability, we are now in the process of fielding these hybrid terminals onto Air Force fighter jets. And this is all done recognizing the value of having that commercial capability and not just relying on these, line of sight data links and sophisticated capability. And so and from the beginning, the warfighter was trying it out and exercising it. And so activities like that, in sync with the SWAC, as the SWAC tries to define the force structure, has to happen. It can't just be the space community on their own. It has to be their customer, for lack of a better term, that is going to need to. I mean, Jeff's I think it was in one of the questions in the link, Chris. It was a comment, I think it was from Paul G, about, hey, the Space Force is now using non IC way of getting their Earth sensing data, shall we say, or the EO systems. And that's another example of a disruptive approach that says, I'm going to use what's out there, as opposed to telling the space provider, here's what I need, now you go get it for me. They're going out and they're buying it on their own. And that's the kind of activity that needs to get integrated into the architectures of the future.
Well, and there's also just a quick comment here. There's also the importance of time. And if one believes that we could be in one or more shooting wars within the next 2 years, time is of the essence. We've got to look at exploiting what we have and not necessarily worrying as much about what could be available in 6, 7, 8 years. And I'm firmly of the view that we will be in a shooting war here very, very soon, potentially in multiple theaters. And that's a pickup game. You play the game with what you have on orbit and what you can access. So let me turn to another audience question for you, Ellen. The question reads, you mentioned that the USG acquisition system doesn't want to create a monopoly when it buys commercial items. This causes the government to frequently try and frequently fail to develop things that exist commercially. The traditional government development contract creates a much larger and more problematic monopoly. It's just a government contractor monopoly. How do you think that the traditional government acquisition monopoly problem can be considered, excuse me, when a commercial item is being considered?
Well, yeah, you've actually, whoever asked that question, that's exactly what is the dilemma. We have this idea that we can't rely on one particular vendor because we're not going to get the best price, or because we can't count on them. There's a variety of reasons, and we have to, it's all about, Chris, how you look at risk. And yes, if I go out and I decide I'm going to provide this capability by buying a commercial product, then there are risks associated with that. And the answer to that is not to develop a government competitor to that commercial product. It's to make it continue to be attractive to sell to me, right? That's what the commercial guys do. If I'm trying to buy it, it's not trying to compete with it, because the commercial business will continue to evolve and change. It's very dynamic. And so in my view, you've hit on what is a key challenge in terms of culture and view between government, the traditional government way. If we embrace commercial from the beginning and we recognize the risks and we take different approaches to that risk, long-term service contracts, with surge capability priced in, being willing to maybe pay a bit of a more premium price so that I have it available. These are all things that can reduce the risk of being with a dominant commercial vendor, as I would like to put it, as opposed to a monopoly. And we're going to, by the way, we're going to see that play out in the next couple of years with proliferated LEO satellite communication, as we see how competitors enter the marketplace, with Starlink being the first to market, which brings them a strong competitive position. But others are coming, and we will see how that plays out in the commercial marketplace. But the answer is not for us to create our own proliferated LEO constellation. That is not the answer.
Let me ask another question that comes from, in this case, Al Munson. Al, thank you for your question. He says, the SpaceX revolution in launch costs has enabled a redo of the U.S. national security space architecture around the proliferation of small satellites, and this transformation is well underway. He then says, an unintended consequence of this transformation may be that the government-owned architecture will destroy the market for U.S. commercial space sensing systems, for example, Maxar, Planet, etc. Is this a good outcome, he asks. Any takers?
I think Ellen just referred to, the business models on both sides have to continue to evolve. And I love to go to, into groups that don't think about space all the time and sort of open my talk with, when did space get easy? And we used to revere the rocket scientists because they were sort of these scary people that had to be put in their corners in order to go sort of do the unimaginable. And I was at an art design speaker who's doing very innovative, creative stuff at a lecture on Saturday. And he opened up with the SpaceX Starship first stage landing in the chopsticks and just said, look, before I say anything else about innovation, this was it this week. And so here's an appreciation from a guy who stayed away from physics, right, in his college degree, appreciating what was taking place. So the business models, as we're talking about, are in competition, and the enablers for those business models. Just to make the point, 80% of DoD lift and 80% of DoD comms come out of commercial stuff, and that commercial stuff's changing all the time. So FedEx is delivering bullets as well as C-17s, and we have figured out that business model. And so I agree in the question, Al, that there's a disruption that takes place as you shift gears, but holding on to it too long never turns out well, and that marshmallow doesn't go back into the bag. And so the ability for us to take commercial sensors and put them on small satellites and get this kind of imagery through communication systems that are either demonstrated by Starlink or by the Tranche 1, is opening up the door to imagining operations, as General Pawlikowski mentioned, that says, don't stop with showing off the technology, get it into ops.
Right. I think, Al, you're hitting on what I refer to as that, the commercial business could continue to evolve. Some of what you refer to as the commercial actually, as Mandy and I would joke, is kind of a government contractor that was doing some commercial business on the side. And then there's some of them who are truly started as commercial. So though there's going to be this constant tension. We do, if the government wants some unique satellites and they decide that a smaller satellites is a better way to go, well, then that means that they are going to now be competing with the commercial guys for that product. And so then you have that tension that Paul Graziano talked about of, we've got the global marketplace versus what gets thrown into the prioritization scheme of the IC community, shall I say, right? And there's never enough, by the way. There's never enough. And so there will always, in my view, there will always be a demand signal for commercial from the Department of Defense. It may not be from the Space Force, the IC community providers, but there will be that. And also there needs to continue to evolve the commercial side. Once again, if a commercial product is 100% reliant on a government contract, then it's not truly a commercial product. So if earth sensing is going to be a commercial product, then those commercial vendors have to figure out how to continue to sell that product in a viably commercial way. So it's like Jeff said, we've got a number of different business models at play here, and they have to evolve and they have to change in response to the demand signal from both the government side and the commercial side.
And I know we're at time, but I'm just going to pile in that the premise of that question is exactly the first part of our first recommendation, that we've got to flip the story around of what can these companies actually do, so we don't design an architecture that's just going to squish a chunk of an emerging commercial market without, again, it goes, I like to use the word curation, right? We've got to go into this with our eyes wide open, and I love how Jeff this process. They've got to change the architectural thinking from the baseline.
I'd like to ask one final question here in our remaining 10 seconds or so. Innovation and risk must be appropriately rewarded. We've all agreed to that. The question is sort of, how do you do it? It's an acquisition problem, yes, but it's also a personnel problem in my view. And that is, for example, who do you promote and why? What are the incentives for promotion and risk-taking in this case? So are we today, in your estimation, rewarding sort of a no mistakes mentality in terms of acquisition versus a willingness to take risk in our promotion boards and things like that? To what extent is that an issue, and to what extent should that lever be pulled to try to influence outcomes in the future?
Every ecosystem has its problems, and it would be really easy in a conversation like this to point out in a military organization how rank causes some behaviors. And I don't subscribe to this, but if you're getting promoted in zone, having no failure on your record is probably not a bad thing to have when you're up to a system that's working a much bigger problem to go do that. And so at the other end of the spectrum, rewarding people who fail in a tight-knit organization, as Ellen pointed out, Derek knows exactly what he has to do to get the behaviors he wants for 24-month centers. And Derek will have a problem scaling it to operations, as Mandy and Ellen pointed out, but maybe that's a different question that he asked. So I'm going to go back to my siren song. You get the behaviors you incentivize, and powering through and mitigating risk has to be rewarded. And keeping programs green mentality has pushed risk way from mitigation to avoidance.
Go ahead, Ellen.
Yeah, Chris, I think I would rather spend my time focusing on how do I give and empower people that are smart and educated and understanding to get the job done, and to worry about whether I'm promoting the right people. Because in the end, after spending 36 years in the Air Force, I can tell you, most of the time I did not do what people told me I was supposed to be doing to get promoted. Yet I think I did okay. So, Jeff and I engaged on a program that I probably got promoted to my first star based on, which turned out to be a failure. Never got fielded, did not get accomplished. So I tend to believe, at least on the military side, our promotion system is based on recognizing the key attributes that lead to being able to lead at the higher level. And so I think that we are better off to focus on trying to give people the tools they need and to empower them in the freedom to create, which is what innovation is all about. But that's my 2 cents.
Well, thank you very much. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks to Ellen Pawlikowski, Mandy Vaughn, and Jeff Harris for your fine presentations. Thank you to Alyssa for her outstanding support, and thank you to our audience. Please be on the lookout for upcoming NSSA events and Moorman Center products. As always, we welcome your feedback. Please do check out our website at www.nssaspace.org, where, by the way, you will find Jeff's recent paper along with the slides that were used today and the DSB report in full, the unclassified DSB report in full as well. With that, thanks to everyone for joining us. Kayla, get well. We miss you. And everybody have a great day. Thank you so much.